Insulin resistance. Let's talk about it. Is it overhyped, or is it one of the most important factors in your health? Should you be deconstructing your sandwich to optimize your glucose response, or should you not really be worrying about blood sugar unless you're diabetic? These are the hard-hitting questions that we're going to cover in today's video, all about insulin resistance, blood sugar tracking, all that good stuff. Dr. Jason Fung was kind of one of the people that popularized the idea of talking about insulin resistance as it relates to obesity in 2016 with his book, The Obesity Code. In his book, he essentially posits that obesity is purely a hormonal disorder, and it is caused pretty much entirely by insulin resistance. And his recommendation to reverse this is intermittent fasting. So pretty much thanks to this, we had the intermittent fasting craze. I made my video about intermittent fasting, that video blew up, and that's how my channel started. So that's fun. But as this idea has gained popularity and traction, there has obviously been some pushback against it. So I wanted to take a video, and honestly this will probably end up being a series of videos, but at least a video to explore the idea of insulin resistance as it relates to body composition and health, and then also take a look at my personal insulin control, glucose regulation, blood sugar levels, etc., to make sure that I am metabolically healthy. But first, what is insulin resistance? How does it actually work? When you eat sugar or carbs, your body breaks this down into glucose, and the glucose gets thrust into the bloodstream, but having too high of a concentration of glucose in the bloodstream can cause a lot of damage to the body. So the body needs to do something with this glucose, and so it releases a hormone called insulin. And insulin acts kind of like a key that opens up cells so that glucose can go into that cells and get out of the bloodstream. But when you end up with too much glucose in your bloodstream too frequently, either because you're just eating a lot of sugar, or you're eating in a way, there's a lot of different ways, but in a way that would just keep spiking your blood sugar, insulin stops working as well. And this can happen with many different hormones and drugs. So for example, melatonin is also a hormone, and it helps you sleep. So if you start taking melatonin at night to help you sleep, eventually your body grows a tolerance to it, and you have to keep taking more and more and more for it to have the same effect. And insulin resistance is not quite the same mechanism, but it's very similar in how, as the body starts producing more, you start to essentially need more and more in order to accomplish the same thing in the body. And just as if you started taking a ton of melatonin, that would have some negative health consequences, when your body starts producing a lot of insulin, that also has negative health consequences. It's this insulin resistance that leads to chronically elevated blood sugar, because the cells are not responding as well to the insulin, and so the sugar is staying in your bloodstream. And then over time, since the body still needs to do something with that sugar, it starts storing that sugar as fat. And then additionally, one of the physiologic effects of insulin on the brain is to promote the feeling of satiety. So as you become more insulin resistant, insulin becomes less and less satiating, and so you start to get hungrier faster. You need to eat more to feel just as full. And so this kind of results in a cycle of
overeating, increased blood sugar, overeating, increased blood sugar, gaining fat, etc.
So the question is, how much of a difference does this make in the body? How much of a difference does it make for your health and for your body composition? All of the research that I have done in the last 5 or so years of looking into this myself has led me to the conclusion that this is one of the biggest factors in health span, in longevity, and in body composition. The biggest reason being that high blood sugar levels essentially cause the body to go into like an inflammatory defense state and release like a waterfall of inflammatory mechanisms and cytokines that just cause a whole host of, inflammation is like the root cause of like every disease. So this can lead to organ damage. It can lead to the development of some of our top disease killers like heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and like many other serious health problems. And studies show that suboptimal glucose regulation, or insulin resistance, is linked to earlier onset of death and disease, even in non-diabetics. So even in people whose tests would all show that they are not diabetic or pre-diabetic. There are prospective studies that show that increased glucose variability, which essentially for the most part translates to just a lot more high glucose levels throughout the day, is associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, frailty, cardiovascular death, cancer death, and cancer from any cause compared with lower glucose variability. And then studies have also looked at the risk of developing these things relative to your A1C levels, which essentially tell you your average blood glucose over the last 3 months. And the studies have shown that even within the range of the levels that would be deemed healthy, there is a sliding scale of an increased risk as you get closer and closer to the benchmark for when it actually would be deemed unhealthy and you would be diagnosed as pre-diabetic. So even if you have an A1C level that would be deemed as healthy, if yours is on the higher end of the healthier range, you're still going to have increased risk for cardiovascular disease, cardiovascular death, death from all causes, frailty, cognitive decline, and dementia, COVID-19 hospitalizations and death, cancer mortality, among a lot of other things. Additionally, 1 in 5 women have PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, and that basically comes down to being dysregulation of blood sugar. I have helped a lot of my own clients who have PCOS basically get rid of all of their symptoms and get regular periods back just by implementing a couple tips to help them regulate their blood sugar. Insulin is a hormone. All hormones talk to each other in the body. So if one is off, it's going to affect everything else in your body. So I could literally be here for another hour discussing all of the potential negative effects of developing insulin resistance or just having suboptimal glucose regulation. So is insulin resistance worth paying attention to? Is your blood sugar worth paying attention to? I say yes. And so it's because of this that I have been wanting to wear a continuous glucose monitor for years, because it essentially continuously monitors your glucose. Like, it's a little device that you put on your arm and it can just track your blood sugar over time. And this just gives such powerful insights into what your glucose is doing. And I am so freaking excited because today is the day. Actually, not today. I get it in a couple days. A couple days from now is the day that I finally get to make these dreams come true.
And I'm gonna get to wear a continuous glucose monitor and track my glucose and see what my glucose metabolism is like.
Like, literally since starting my channel, this is a video that I have been wanting to make and an experiment that I've been wanting to run on myself. I'm about to learn so much about my body, and can you tell I'm excited? I'm really excited. So I will catch up with you guys when I put that on, and then we'll keep talking more about blood sugar. Okay, it is time for me to set up my CGM. I am so excited, but a little bit nervous to stab my arm. Okay, I should follow the instructions on the app. Let's set up your CGM. Continue. Okay, we got the thingy. We got the other thingy.
Wait, Mom! I need moral support!
It's giving me the instructions to actually do the thing, and I don't want to mess up said thing, so we're bringing in some help so that I don't mess this up. Oh. Pick a spot.
Right here.
Back?
Right there.
Like,
I'm a little scared, but it didn't actually hurt at all.
she flinches in the video.
Oh no.
Help.
It doesn't hurt. You can do it. Go for it. You can do it. Come on, come on, come on, come on.
Is it like when you take your blood?
No, no, you don't even feel it. It doesn't feel even like that.
How? It's a huge needle.
It's not. Go.
Oh my god, that literally felt like nothing.
I told you.
Oh. Okay, cool. Okay, so I was able to connect my Oura Ring to my January AI app, which is very exciting because this means it's also gonna have my exercise data, because exercise can affect your glucose as well. I am so excited. I have my CGM. This little trusty guy is gonna be going with me everywhere for the next 2 weeks. And you might be wondering,
Marissa, if you've been wanting to do this for so long and you think it's so important, why haven't you done this yet?
the answer is I've been keeping my eye on the CGM space for quite a while now, and honestly the biggest deterrent was just price. These little things could get so freaking expensive and it adds up over time, and I just could never get myself to pull the trigger with the available options. But a couple of months ago, I think on Instagram, I stumbled across a company called January, and they are sponsoring this video, so big shout out to them. But I was initially intrigued because they use AI to be able to just take 2 weeks of data from your CGM and extrapolate that to give you a predictive model of what your glucose would be like for other foods at other times. So essentially you only have to get one of these guys. You don't have to keep replacing them every 2 weeks, which is what you have to do like everywhere else. Instead, they just use the first 2 weeks of data to create your digital twin, and then you can just continue to use their app without a continuous glucose monitor to see what your glucose is predicted to do in response to whatever foods you log in the app. So essentially, instead of having to spend like over $200 a month to keep getting these things in order to keep getting personalized insights that you get after you eat things and get the data, you can instead just get one of these, and then you have continuous personalized insights that are predictive. And January is the only app on the market right now that has this level of predictive accuracy when it comes to your glucose levels. And then the other big platforms in the space don't use AI, so you have to continue to wear a continuous glucose monitor in order to get personalized insights. And then lastly, I also love that it integrates your other health data. So I connected it to my Oura Ring, so it can read my sleep data, it can read my heart rate, and it also can use those things to factor into the prediction. So it's not just predicting based off of the food, it's predicting based off of a lot of other factors that also influence your blood sugar. It also takes your activity level and your exercise into account. So it's able to take all of this different data and use it to give you very like personalized bio-individual insights into your glucose metabolism. That's one of the big things that I absolutely love about them as well, is it just, the ethos of the brand is all about not taking a one-size-fits-all approach and instead making it a very bio-individual approach that takes the individual person into account. So like the AI model of your glucose is not based on like the average person, it is based off of your data and your digital twin that is created in the first 2 weeks of using the CGM. So I was researching glucose, insulin resistance, etc. today, you know, as you do. And I ended up actually stumbling across a podcast interview with Dr. Mark Hyman and the founder of January, and it was fascinating. I'll leave a link to it down in the description box below in case any of you want to listen to it. But essentially the podcast was about the future of AI in health and how it's going to really help democratize healthcare. And it went into kind of like what we can expect in the near future when it comes to the capability of AI. And it's just so cool to think what this technology is going to be able to do in the future. So like, you guys know me, I'm a huge nerd when it comes to health and fitness, and I've been using wearables since the beginning of my journey. Like I've been using my Oura Ring for years. And like the insights that this data can provide us with now are so powerful. Like in 5 to 10 years, it's going to be insane. But anyway, I digress. I recommend listening to the podcast episode if you're interested in kind of diving into that. But basically, it got me even more excited about January as a company, as a platform to help you optimize your health. So if any of you do want to check it out, highly, highly recommend. You can go to january.ai/fitandnerdy and use the code FitAndNerdy to get yourself 20% off. I will leave a link down in the description box below. Go check it out. This is one of the biggest steps you can take towards getting a much deeper understanding of your body and your health and working towards optimization of it. So I'm doing a little glucose experiment today. I just went and got my morning iced mocha with almond milk, and instead of just drinking it and going straight home and then sitting like I normally would, I am now going for like a 20-minute walk to see if that flattens out the blood sugar spike. So last time I had the mocha, my blood sugar spiked to about 130. This time it didn't go above 105 and it's already back down to 95. So loving this guy. As important as I clearly think, you know, keeping track of insulin resistance and tracking your blood sugar is, I want to quickly just touch on some of the pushback that I've seen on it. Some people have pushed back saying that if your blood sugar is measuring within the healthy range, there's no reason to track your blood sugar. The thing is, it's estimated that only about 7 to 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy, and that 1 in 3 Americans is pre-diabetic, and 80% of them don't even know. So first of all, how do you even know if someone has normal glucose responses if you aren't tracking your glucose in the first place? Like, one of the biggest reasons that the perspective that like normal is fine is detrimental is that glucose response is kind of, it's on a spectrum, and there are certain thresholds. Like if your A1C is less than 5.6%, you're considered normal. If it's greater than 5.7%, you're considered pre-diabetic, and if it's over 6.5%, you have type 2 diabetes. But it's not like one day a switch flips and you're in the next category. It's not like you go from perfectly healthy and normal to like all of a sudden you're pre-diabetic. It slowly creeps up. Like insulin resistance develops over time. So if you are tracking your glucose response, you can bring awareness to the fact that maybe even though like your A1C is normal, you might be eating in a way, or just your lifestyle may be in such a way that you are spiking your glucose a lot more than would necessarily be considered healthy for your insulin levels, and thus might be promoting a slow development towards becoming pre-diabetic and ultimately diabetic. But you're not gonna know any of that if you're not continuously monitoring your glucose. And like waiting until you're diagnosed as pre-diabetic or diabetic to start tracking your glucose, like why? Why not just track ahead of time so that you can prevent yourself from developing those things? Having the data means you can make adjustments. It means you can see your trends, and there are so many like easy interventions to apply to your lifestyle to normalize your glucose levels. Like there's no reason to not have that data and be able to be proactive about it. Okay, so interesting insight today. Apparently coconut water spikes my glucose like crazy.
This is where I had it, or here, and then it spiked my glucose up to, what's the peak there? Like 175.
That's wild.
And so this is really good to know, because that means I can, if I want to be careful about it, just include coconut water in a more intentional way into my life. So, you know, I usually go for an evening walk. And so if I'm gonna have coconut water, maybe I just have my coconut water before I go for my evening walk. And so I can still have my coconut water and it will help blunt the glucose response. I just finished eating dinner and I really want to have dessert tonight. So I'm gonna eat it ASAP, like as soon as possible after finishing my dinner. And this is because I was going through my data so far from January, and I noticed there were a couple days, especially at the beginning when I first started tracking my glucose, that I had a couple like big glucose spikes that went out of range. And so I was like,
Not quite ideal. Like, what can I do? What's going on here?
And I realized that pretty consistently when I have dessert like farther away from eating dinner, that's when it spikes my glucose. But if I have dessert like right after dinner, I don't get as big of a spike. Like, check this out. So on this day, this was dinner and this was dessert, and this was about like 45 minutes to an hour apart, and I had a huge spike here. And then this day was dinner and dessert like about an hour later, huge spike here. But on this day, this was dinner and this was dessert, or maybe that was dinner and two desserts. You see, they're all like very close together and the spike barely went over 140. And so I was seeing this data like pretty consistently in my tracking. And this makes sense, right? Like if you have sugar by itself, it's going to spike your blood sugar a lot more than if you have fiber and protein and fat in your stomach already. I was just not aware of how kind of narrow that window is in my brain. Like if I still feel full, if I still feel like I'm digesting, then the sugar is probably gonna have some of a buffer. So, you know, I figured waiting an hour after dinner, an hour and a half after dinner to have dessert, no big deal.
Apparently, to my blood sugar, it is a big deal.
And that's a really simple habit that I can now change that is going to have a huge positive effect on my glucose. The more research I do on glucose levels and insulin resistance and all that, the more I realize I don't know. And also the more I realize we don't know, like as a health community. But something that I've been looking into is healthy glucose levels and healthy glucose variability beyond what the like defined levels are for like when it crosses into pre-diabetes and when it crosses into diabetes, because those levels are like the thresholds of when it gets bad. But from what I'm learning, there's a lot of other indicators before it gets to that point that show that it might be trending that way. And so you don't just have to like wait until you are diagnosed as pre-diabetic to be able to look at your glucose data and see that maybe something's not quite right, and maybe if you don't do anything, you could end up being pre-diabetic or diabetic. And this is where I don't think there is a lot of conclusive research yet, but according to the esteemed Peter Attia, when he's working with patients, he wants to see them with a mean glucose of less than 100, a glucose variability of less than 15, and he never wants to see their glucose go above 140, which would not be great news because my glucose has definitely gone over 140 when I had the coconut water and when I've had dessert more than an hour after having dinner. But I also feel like that's kind of par for the course. Like if you know you're having something that's gonna spike your blood sugar, it is gonna go over 140. I don't think that the people saying that are saying that like even if you had straight sugar, completely fasted, a healthy glucose response is that it wouldn't go over 140. I think it's more that the guidelines is you should aim to keep your glucose from going over 140, and that would mean either cutting those foods out or structuring your diet in a way that is going to lower the glucose response of those foods. But then I was also seeing that severe glucose variability is not optimal. You know, you want your glucose to be in a more narrow, healthy range. You don't want it to go too low, you don't want it to go too high. So high glucose variability, not good. And a lot of people are defining that as glucose being over 140 more than 15% of the duration of the recordings from your CGM. And the January app has been showing me that when I do go over 140, it shows the like percentage of time that you're out of range. It's never more than like 5%. It's like 4 or 5%. So hopefully that means I'm okay. Just something to be aware of. All right, we're about to do the most important test.
How does my chocolate frosty smoothie bowl affect my blood sugar?
So I'm gonna take my blood sugar right now. Okay, currently at 95. I'm going to proceed to eat my chocolate frosty smoothie bowl, which is full of protein, fiber, and fat, so I have high hopes.
2 hours later.
It's been 2 hours. Let's see the glucose damage. Oh, I'm at 122.
That's not bad.
Not a huge spike. This is good news. The chocolate frosty bowl will continue to be a staple. Y'all, I just need to rant for a second. Like, the fact that CGMs are in general so hard to get your hands on, like having to go through a doctor, get a prescription, get your insurance to cover it, etc. Just, you have to jump through so many hoops, and you don't often get them. Like, you can go to a doctor and most doctors are gonna say no. And then on top of that, if you can get them, they're so freaking expensive. Like, it just, the more I research this, the more abundantly clear it becomes how incredibly powerful and transformative this data can be for people. Like, it just feels like to a certain extent this technology and this information is being gatekept, and we as a population are just getting more and more sick, and there's this very easy thing that we can do to help prevent that, and it's so hard to get access to. What I am absolutely loving so far about tracking my glucose is just generally how much more awareness it's bringing to my glucose response. Like, before tracking it, I knew it was important, but I never saw it actually like play out in real time. And I was very unaware of how much those little small changes could impact me. I kind of assumed that like I had a good healthy glucose response and I probably didn't need to worry about it because like I don't eat a lot of carbs. And so even though like I knew the information, it wasn't something that was ever at the forefront of my brain. It was never something that I forced myself to be aware of until now. And now that I am aware of it, I'm seeing how much these little things really do impact my glucose response, and how making tiny little easy shifts that don't actually make my life any harder or my diet any more restrictive or anything like that, just tiny little changes can have such drastic impacts on my glucose levels. Like, I am kind of mind blown how easy it is to make these changes. Like, I should have just been doing this from the beginning. So I was just in the shower listening to a podcast about insulin resistance, you know, as one does. At the beginning of the video, I talked about a lot of the long-term negative effects of poor glucose regulation, but I never talked about the short-term effects. When your glucose reaches suboptimal levels, like when it does a big spike, this will cause it to crash, and when it crashes, that can result in cravings because your body is sensing a crash in your level of blood sugar, and your body's like, oh my god, we have to get our blood sugar back up, like we need to eat something really quick that's going to be very high in sugar so we can get our sugar level back up. So it makes you crave things like donuts and cake and all of the sweet things. It also just generally makes you more hungry so that you add more fuel to your body. And then if you put yourself on a glucose roller coaster, it can lead to poor sleep, it can cause acne, it can cause fatigue, like separately from the poor sleep, so like kind of a double whammy. It can have a negative effect on your mood, like talk about being hangry. And then if you're in menopause, it can also worsen menopause symptoms. So day to day, also not super fun to be dealing with glucose roller coaster. So I am getting ready to go to sleep, and I have to say, I've always valued my sleep, but tracking my glucose has made me just value it that much more, because it's not just what you eat that can affect your glucose response. There are a lot of other factors that can affect how well your body metabolizes glucose, one of the big ones being sleep. Studies show that just one night of sleep deprivation can make you as insulin resistant as a person with type 2 diabetes. Other things outside of your diet that can affect your glucose metabolism include how much muscle you have on your body. The more muscle you have, the more glucose you can essentially utilize. Your stress levels play a huge factor in this. Your genetics obviously can also influence this, and then also the phase that you're in your menstrual cycle can have a big impact on your insulin sensitivity. So I wanted to show you guys how I've been a little bit more strategically planning my meals lately. I've been switching over to an animal-based diet, which is in itself inherently a little bit lower glycemic, but even so, like, I'm about to go to the grocery store to get some stuff to make my next few days worth of food, and so I'm checking January right now to see like if what I'm thinking about eating is a good idea, or if I could make a couple swaps to make it even better for my blood sugar. So as an example, I can go in here and let's say I'm thinking about having like ground beef, and I'm probably gonna do like 6 to 8 ounces of that. So first of all, for each food, it shows you the predicted impact on your glucose, which is super helpful. Ground beef, clearly there's like no carbs, so that's gonna have very minimal impact on my blood sugar. So let's add that. Let's say I wanna do a sweet potato. So again, the predicted impact, you can see a little bit more of a spike there, but it's still probably a little bit below 130, so really not bad. And then when you combine that with the beef, you can see it shows you the predicted glucose of the entire meal together. It's clearly a little bit higher than it was with just the beef, but much more of an even glucose response than just the sweet potato. And then let's say I wanna do some white rice. Let me see here. It goes out of range. It goes over 140 if I just had like pure white rice by itself. Now, clearly I am gonna have it with the beef and the sweet potato, so that should help a little bit. But something else I can do in here, and this is what I've really been using, is view alternatives. So it's gonna show me alternative foods that I can have instead of the white rice and the comparative glucose response. So I could do that. Quinoa, also clearly much lower. Cauliflower rice, even lower than that. Wild rice, also a good alternative. So it gives me all of these options and then shows me the difference in the glucose response. So that feature has just been super, super helpful as I have been changing up my diet quite a bit. And this is one of the things that I love about January specifically, and what drew me to going with January as like the first CGM that I'm trying out, is this predictive model where I don't have to trial and error nearly as much. So as I have been tracking my glucose, I have been researching tips on how to optimize glucose response, and I have to say, so far, it doesn't seem like there's any like secret hacks or myths. The big basics that everyone talks about, they're kind of the big basics. So things like going for a post-meal walk is what I'm doing right now. And then also the order in which you eat your food, focusing on the vegetables and fiber first, and then protein and fat, and then having the more carb-heavy, starchy, sugary foods. Then also in that same vein, not eating pure like starchy, sugary carbs by themselves. And then also things like starting your day with a lower glycemic breakfast. Like your breakfast kind of sets the foundation for your glucose response the rest of the day. And then of course sleep. And then lastly, movement and activity as a whole, particularly resistance training. So I have been actively implementing these tips, and I have seen a huge change in my own glucose response. So for the first like week or so of tracking my glucose, I was out of range maybe like 4 or 5% of the time. Out of range being my glucose going over 140. But since I've started implementing these tips, my glucose has stayed under 140 pretty much 100% of the time, most days. So it's been really cool to see that data just like reflected right back at me. It has now been a month since I started using January to track my glucose levels, so I think I'm gonna wrap up the video portion of this experiment here. I'm gonna continue experimenting and continue using January to help me predict my glucose levels and make smarter decisions for my glucose in the future. But I have learned so much in this last month, and I think this insight has been invaluable. Like, I know so much more about my body, so much more about my habits, and now I have AI in the palm of my hand to tell me about my habits and my diet moving forward without having to pay like hundreds of dollars a month to continue using more and more and more and more and more CGM. So no matter how healthy you think you are, I highly recommend taking this step to do this experiment and learn more about your body and get all of these amazingly powerful insights. You really don't know what you don't know until you have the data. So again, if you want to check out January and use their very powerful AI to help you optimize your blood glucose, highly, highly recommend. I'll leave a link down in the description box below, or you can go to january.ai/fitandnerdy and use the code FITANDNERDY to get yourself 20% off. Let me know if you guys have any questions, if you want me to do any follow-up videos on this topic. Go ahead and give this video a big thumbs thumbs up if you liked it. Please share it with your friends, your family, your gym buddies. If you want to see more content from me all about health and fitness, you can check it out over here. To see future videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the little notification bell so you get notified when I post a video, and I will see you very soon. Bye.